So tell us about you and your journey that brought you here to Bhutan.
That brought me first here to Bhutan way back in 1971. Well, first of all, I took a plane from London to Calcutta. It hadn't yet been renamed Kolkata, it was then Calcutta. And then I stayed in Calcutta for 2 or 3 weeks, being looked after very well indeed by late Dasharimp Dorji, the brother of Her Majesty the Royal Grandmother. And then one day he said, right, we're off to Bhutan. And we went to Dum Dum Airport, which is what Calcutta Airport used to be called. And there was a very old Dakota aeroplane waiting for us. It belonged to a little company called Jam Air. And they had 2 Dakotas. And one of the people, one of the mechanics said to me, oh, when they both crash, the airline will close down. But fortunately, it didn't crash, which is why I'm talking to you now. And we flew up, we stopped halfway between Calcutta and the Bhutan border to refuel. And it was a new experience for me because the plane circled over a grass field whilst a little boy with a stick chased away the cows. And then we landed and we taxied up to a big oil drum, and the pilot got out, and incidentally, he was the same man that sold us our airline ticket, and he was the same man who drove the little minibus out to the plane, and he was the same man who checked our ticket when we got onto the plane, and it was the same man who brought the sweets for you to eat. And then he put on his hat and he went and he piloted the plane. We then took off and came to Hashimara, which is just south of Phuntsholling. Soling, and again a grass meadow with a little boy chasing the cows away. Landed, nobody else. I came up with late Dasharimp, who was looking after me, and there were 2 jeeps from Bhutan. One of them had the number Bhutan 23, and that was going to be my little vehicle here in Bhutan. And I don't know who's got Bhutan 23 today, but then it was on a tiny little Willis Jeep. And we drove to Phuntsholling, and then after a little stay there, we drove up this incredible road through into the mountains, ending up in Paro. And of course, in those days, there weren't many roads. There was the road from Phuntsholling to Paro and Thimphu. The east-west highway only went as far as Wongdi Phodrang Dzong, and they were just beginning to cut the continuation of the east-west highway past Wongdi. And I went to Punakha, and the road there was completely unmade. They had just started to make the first cutting. And so from the point of view of travel, it was much easier than it is today. And do you know why? Because if you drove from Paro to Phuntsholling, you would be surprised if you met more than 3 other vehicles. Today, you go from Paro to Phuntsholling and you're continually avoiding trucks, cars, people overtaking, people speeding. In those days, it was a much more pleasant drive.
So before we talk about your experience in Bhutan, we would like to know what made you decide to come to Bhutan?
What made me decide? Well, I had never heard of Bhutan. Never. Nobody I knew had ever heard of Bhutan. I was teaching at a school in Oxford. Nobody in Oxford had ever heard of Bhutan. And so when I was first invited as a result of going to a dinner party, I wrote back and said, no, thank you, because I'd no idea where Bhutan was. And then I was invited again, the invitation was repeated, and I took the trouble to find out where Bhutan was, and I visited the Royal Geographical Society in London, who tell me Bhutan was one of the last remaining secret countries in the world. Nobody came in, nobody went out. And I thought that was a bit interesting. And then they showed me their map of Bhutan. And in those days, a map of Bhutan was very sensitive militarily, because of course, just a few years earlier, China had taken over Tibet. So maps of this part of the world were very sensitive, and they showed me their map. Piece of paper that big, little diamond-shaped outline of Bhutan, and what made me decide to come here was the fact that on the map there was just one word written, and that was unmapped. So since I had never seen a map where it simply said unmapped, I thought, well, that'd be interesting for a year or two. And so I came. I had no idea. I thought I was going to be teaching physics in a school in Bhutan. I didn't realize that actually there weren't really many schools in Bhutan. So it was only just before I left England I discovered that the job involved helping to set up a little school for somebody who was then known as Desha Jigme, who later, of course, became the fourth king. So it was an interesting introduction to Bhutan. It was an amazing introduction to a very, very unique and unusual country. And it was an enormously privileged introduction to Bhutan. And I stayed then for just a year and then went back with no intention of returning. But you know, Bhutan is a very funny place. It's got a magical side to Bhutan. It can weave an invisible silken web over somebody. And no matter what happens in the future, you suddenly find you're pulled back to Bhutan. And if when I left, somebody had said you'd be celebrating your 81st birthday here, I would have laughed myself silly. But there we are, last April I celebrated my 81st birthday here. So one characteristic of Bhutan is that it has quite a unique atmosphere. And that's not really a very good word, it's a hackneyed word, but there is something about Bhutan which can act like a magnet. And I'm not alone in finding that. Many foreigners, even foreigners who come here on holiday, find something that draws them to the country. So I'm not an academic, I'm not a mountaineer, I don't know much about religion, I'm not an anthropologist, I just happen to be an old physics teacher who happened by chance to come to Bhutan 49 years ago and somehow has found myself entangled in the silken web of the magic that is Bhutan, if I can. Sounds like a tourist advert, doesn't it?
It sounds beautiful, like a poetry. So when you, I think you visited Bhutan first time in 1971.
71, that's
So you
right.
were a young man,
Not really, no. I was early 30s.
Yes.
I suppose compared with 81 it's young, but I mean,
yes.
no, I was not a sort of a 21-year-old volunteer or anything like that. No,
So
no.
when you first entered Bhutan as an Englishman, so what were your thoughts and observations?
Well, it varied. Sometimes I would sit outside my little house in Paro with Taksang looking down at me, and I would say to myself, what on earth am I doing here? Why aren't I happily in Oxford going to the local pub? It was quite a different place to be from Oxford. First of all, Bhutan then was a communications black hole. Not only people, but information didn't come in, it didn't come out. You think, no television, no radio, no, what do we have now? It's called internet or something like that. No newspapers, no books. So the only knowledge you had was what you remembered in your head. And if you forgot what the capital of France was, you couldn't look it up. And today, mobile phone, every single person in Bhutan, wherever you are, up in Laya or wherever, you have got the whole of the world's knowledge at your fingertips on your mobile phone. So don't just play with your mobile phone to send silly text messages to your friend in Thimphu. Use your mobile phone to learn and to get knowledge. It's all there. In 1971 there was nothing at all. So young people growing up in Bhutan today are so lucky.
And being honored with the Bhutanese citizenship by His Majesty the King, how has this changed your life?
Well, as you probably know, I have since almost 30 years ago an adopted Bhutanese son, Gesang Wangchuk. So I have a family with 5 grandchildren, ranging in age from 24 to 4, so that gives me a good span of grandchildren. And thanks to the enormous, not just kindness, but thoughtfulness of His Majesty the Fourth King, I'm able to have my old age here in Bhutan without having to get a visa every few days or pay $250 a day. I've been fortunate that I can live here in Bhutan with the family, with Gesang and his wife and the 5 grandchildren, and that's a great privilege for somebody in old age. So His Majesty's thoughtfulness, and I say he thought about it, his thoughtfulness has made my old age into something far better than it could have been. So that's the most significant way. It means that I can live out my life with a family around me.
Do you feel being honored with Bhutanese citizenship, do you feel it has changed you as a person as well?
Well, I don't think the simple... I suppose it has, in the sense of I have a greater security that I know that I can stay in Bhutan. But no, I don't think it's actually changed me as a person. It's changed the circumstances of life, so that probably has an effect. But I don't think it's changed my outlook on life. Being in Bhutan has changed my outlook on life quite distinctly. One of the things in the West we do is we over-plan. Mm-hmm. So if I was going to run a little event or have a party, I'd probably plan for it at least 2 months in advance. And all the details and all the planning would all be worked out. And that would all be done way in advance. When I go back to England, I'm sometimes called by a friend who says, Michael, can you come for dinner? And I say, when? And they say, in 4 weeks' time. Mm-hmm. I said, well, I can't possibly tell you in 4 weeks' time. I have got used to the Bhutanese idea of last-minute planning.
Right.
And when I came back from a short week in England in July, there at Heathrow Airport was a big poster from a bank which said, plan for tomorrow, today. Mm-hmm. And I thought to myself, if it was Paro Airport, from the BOB, it would say, plan for today, tomorrow. Mm-hmm. Because that is often what happens. The thing gets planned after it's happened. Right. And I think that gives one a different perspective on things. I've learned in 4.5 decades that in Bhutan, things always turn out okay in the end. And you simply have to be optimistic and not get worked up and worried. For my 70th birthday, up in my little garden up in Bagana, we had invited nearly 100 people to a little barbecue. When I woke up in the morning, there was absolutely no preparation or organisation, none whatsoever. And I was beginning to go stressed, saying, but you know, people are coming at 6. Don't worry, don't worry. By 5 o'clock in the evening, there were pine leaves all over the garden. There was a tent. There was a bonfire going. It all works out all right in the end. Relax. So I think that's one fundamental way in which I've changed. And I still now am a bit like that when I go to London, to the frustration of my friends when I say, ring me the day before and I'll tell you if I can come for dinner.
In last 20 years, when you lived in Bhutan, You might have interacted with people from all walks of life. Do you feel there is a change, major change in culture, maybe the maybe lifestyle?
Right. Well, now, my great message these days is, if I'm asked about what changes have I seen in 49 years, my answer is I have actually seen no changes. Because all the visible changes, the buildings, the roads, the motor cars, the mobile phones, they are not real changes. They could all disappear in 5 minutes. A building could fall down in 5 minutes. If we didn't get petrol, there wouldn't be any motor cars on the road. Your mobile phone could break down if the satellite stopped working. The visible changes are not the important changes. If I can give you an example, take a modern block of very nice apartments here in Thimphu. You look at the apartment, you think, gosh, that's modern. Television, internet connections, electric heating. The family that have just moved into this apartment have just come from the village of Yangnia in East Bhutan. They've been in the apartment a week. Has their mind and their heart changed in a week just because they're living in a modern apartment? Of course it hasn't. The visible signs, the buildings, the apartments, the modernity is all very superficial. What really counts is what changes have there been in the minds of people and in the hearts of people. Now, I think there's no doubt that the increased availability of material goods increases materialism. Because the one thing which is common between Australia and Bhutan, between London and Thimphu, is something called human nature. And the human nature is embodied in those three animals that are in the middle of the wheel of life that you see in the entrance to every temple. The snake, the serpent, the pig, and the rooster. And you know what those represent. Basic human nature is universal. What I've noticed in Bhutan is now there is greater availability, and therefore that encourages more materialism. And I think that's something that has to be watched. You will look now at not only Thimphu, but Punakha, Tashigang. You will see signs on shops, coloured, lighted signs, which is beginning to make parts of Thimphu look almost like Bangkok. All that creates desire. And if there is anything in Buddhism which is so marvelous as it is that concept that discontent and unhappiness is created by desire. The more things you can see, the more desire there is. And one thing I've noticed is that in the past, if we look at the gap, now the motto of the new government is narrowing the gap. So what about the gap? In every society there is a gap. In 1971, the gap was very small. Even the gap between the royal family and the people was very small. The third king drove around in a little Willis Jeep. The ministers, well, the house behind us here, where my Royal Tutorial Project office was, this house was the house of late Limpodawa Sering, the world's longest serving foreign minister. This was his simple little house. What I've noticed now is that the gap has got bigger, but also the gap is more visible. We're acutely aware a big Land Cruiser goes by. We're acutely aware 5-star hotels coming up. We're acutely aware luxury restaurants starting. The gap is more visible. And I think when the gap gets bigger and more visible, there's a little potential danger there. So that's one change I've noticed. But what I'm really interested in is not the visible. As I say, what I'm really interested in is the change in people's heads and hearts. And the greatest asset of Bhutan isn't the mountains, the forests, the environment. The greatest asset of Bhutan is its people. And if you talk to a tourist, and I often ask this question, what is the one thing you will always remember from your visit to Bhutan? They don't say the scenery. 9 out of 10 say, the people. And when I say people are Bhutan's greatest asset, I don't mean economically, workers. I mean the nature, the personality, the atmosphere of the people. And whatever happens as the nation develops, I hope that the hearts and minds of the people will always preserve this very special quality. And I would say that it's a mistake to try and follow the models of countries outside. One can learn from them, but one doesn't have to follow them. Bhutan should learn and develop its own models of doing things. This applies to bureaucracy. It applies to rules and regulations. You don't have to do exactly what other countries are doing. Let's have a Bhutanese human-based approach to things. Let's have a bureaucracy which helps people to do something rather than, as in many countries, hinders people from doing things. Let's have positiveness. So, if one thinks of the past and the future, fortunately, Bhutan has managed to preserve the essential, unique character of the people. And that's its biggest tourist asset. Not the temples, not the forests, not the mountains, but the people.
I have earlier interviewed a famous Buddhist Rinpoche, and he was mentioning that most Bhutanese pride that they are unique, we are unique. So do you feel Bhutanese are unique? He was kind of criticizing also.
Yes, I know who you're thinking of. I know exactly who you're thinking of.
If you could share your
In
personal
a way, yes, because first of all, as we are well aware, Bhutan has never been occupied by a foreign power. Secondly, as we are well aware, until 1971, Bhutan insulated itself totally from the outside world. So by that very fact, Bhutan is unique. There are very few countries in the world who can refer to those two particular aspects. So, yes, I believe Bhutan is in many, many ways unique, and that isn't referring to its environment or to the people or to the temples or the dzongs or whatever. It's no one single thing. It is a package of all these things put together. And in that package, one of the most important components is precisely the personality, nature and character of the people. Now, Bhutan has had a real difficulty because for 250 years, the main job of the rulers of Bhutan was to keep foreigners out. In some ways, to keep the British out in the days of the Raj.
Right.
And so the uniqueness is also influenced by that very fact. Now, as we see more and more outside influences coming into Bhutan, and more Bhutanese going out and bringing back outside influences, I think Bhutan needs to take care to try to preserve its uniqueness. One bad side, which Rinpoche may well have referred to you, of feeling unique, is this Bhutanese ego.
Right.
And it is true, the Bhutanese self-pride is very significant. It has some very good things. If you walk down Norsim Lam, you see a Bhutanese, old or young, walking down the street. They carry themselves very well. they exude a pride in who they are. Now, what I sometimes say is, a Bhutanese knows who he or she is. And that should remain. On the other hand, the ego, I've already said this, manifests itself when you're driving along the road sometimes, where somebody will insist on overtaking a load of cars. I always say a Bhutanese driver cannot stand having another car in front of him or her. Right. It's a challenge to get past him because my ego. So the uniqueness does have a downside which needs to be watched. And I would very much support Rinpoche in referring to it because it does need to be said. Because every coin has two sides. The Bhutanese ego has a good side, but it can also have a negative side.
You were stressing also about Bhutanese becoming more materialistic.
Yes.
But
yes.
Do you feel it's bad in the long run?
I cannot answer that question because it depends on my perspective. If I am somebody who has managed to earn enough money in one way or another and just bought myself a top-of-the-range Land Cruiser and I've just built myself an enormous great new house and I go on holiday to Bangkok 4 times a year and I do an awful lot of shopping and my wife has got lots of lovely jewellery and all the latest makeup and all this sort of thing, I'll think, oh, jolly good, I like this materialism. But on the other hand, I am a young 24-year-old who has studied for a degree and find myself unable to find a job, walking up and down the street in Thimphu, lost, losing purpose in life because I don't have a job. I might not find all this materialism so good. So it depends on your perspective. And this takes me to another point. Our education system teaches young people a whole lot of knowledge. It doesn't spend enough time teaching young people how to live a contented and harmonious life. We put too much emphasis on this idea that our success in life depends on our job. We put too much emphasis on the idea that our contentment and happiness depends on becoming a director general or a dasho. We don't put enough emphasis on the idea that we don't derive our worth from our job. We derive our worth from what we are in our interaction with people and in our mindset. So I would like to see the education system preparing young people to be a contented and harmonious member of society with self-fulfillment, which does not depend on the job you've got, but it depends on the sort of person I am and how I relate to my friends, my family. And friends and family for a Bhutanese is very, very important. We should put much more emphasis on that. It's sad to see a young person coming back, having studied for some degree, without a job for 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 years. But if we teach them that your worth doesn't just come from your job, it comes from what you can do as a volunteer, as a member of society, as a member of your family, then we perhaps would be more able to cope with not having a full-time job. And that, if I may, takes me to another point. I would like to advocate what I call GNH 2.0. We have gross national happiness. I would like to advocate gross national harmony, because I believe happiness can be a very selfish attribute. I'm happy because I've just pinched his gold watch. I'm happy, he's not. Happiness is about me.
Subjective.
Now, harmony by very definition is not about me, it's about me and my relationship with other things. You cannot have a harmony from one musical note. You have to have at least two notes to create harmony. Similarly, harmony in society, you cannot just think of yourself. You may make yourself happy, but you'll make other people unhappy. So I would like to advocate lots of attention to the word harmony. How can we teach young people, you could say people as old as me, you know, an old leopard cannot change its spots. I'm too late. We're talking about the young people of Bhutan. How can we teach them what harmony means, what working together means, whether it's working together with nature, as in environmental conservation, whether it's working together with your friends, as in creating a warm, caring society, whether it's working in harmony in your family, helping look after the grandchildren, or whatever. Harmony is to me very important, and the example I always give, if you go to the cremation ground, there is not very much happiness, but there is an enormous amount of harmony. Harmony between the bereaved and all their friends and family who come to support them. Harmony between the people and the religious, the monk body. Harmony between the people and the understanding that nothing lasts forever. Harmony between the people and all the dogs who are waiting for the leftovers from lunch. The cremation ground exudes harmony. It wouldn't be very sensible to say it exuded happiness. So I believe that if we have a harmonious society, it will be easier for you as an individual to be happy in a good way. Whereas if we only concentrate on happy, you might be happy, but I'm jolly well not, because you've just pinched what I had, which has made you happy. So I believe we should teach young people for the future the concept of worth from yourself as a person, your mind, how you go about doing things, worth of yourself because of your harmonious living with society and the environment around you. And if we look at all this current emphasis on environment, conservation of the environment, what we're talking about is the human being living in harmony with the earth, with the environment. And I believe this word harmony is so powerful, and I would like to see schools not only having a policy of gross national happiness in school, but also gross school harmony, GSH.
When you were talking about education that time, I wanted to ask, I met a Japanese volunteer who was in Bhutan, and he said he was quite surprised. So many Bhutanese, they said they are into higher education, like everybody wants master's degree. And he was a little shocked that I think in Japan they are more skilled laborers.
Absolutely.
But in Bhutan we have more with master's degree but no skills. So if you could.
Absolutely. Well, shall I say
this.
something shocking?
Yes.
And I'm sure your audience will be very unhappy about this. I personally would forbid any more PhDs. PhDs teach you an awful lot about some very, 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 very tiny little piece of knowledge. It doesn't really broaden you, except there may be some PhDs in specialities like medicine, for example, where you need to become an expert in a small field. So excuse it. But general PhDs I would forbid. I would also severely restrict the number of master's degrees that people go for, because Bhutan has no need for nor use of thousands of people with master's degrees. I certainly, if I were in charge of the civil service, and I'm sure all civil servants would be very glad that I'm not, but if I were, I would not give extra salary or promotion increments for people who got a master's degree. I would give it for what they did with the master's degree, not for just having it, but what they used it for. And what so often happens is somebody does a master's degree and that's it, never used for anything. Waste of money, waste of time. When we come to bachelor's degrees, I believe it is too common in Bhutan to imagine that if my son or daughter is going to be successful, they've got to get a university degree. That is not true. Many, 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 many people are highly successful without a university degree. We hear that car just going by. Yes. There is a driver. If he is Bhutanese, he is manifesting ego.
Bhutanese ego.
However, so I believe the education system, I've said, needs to change. I believe one very important way it needs to change is to get over this overemphasis on academics. The idea that you have to pass class 12, then you have to go for a university degree. I say that getting a university degree is the best possible way in Bhutan of becoming unemployed. Because the Prime Minister the other day in a speech said that over 50% of the people with a university degree are unemployed.
Right.
If I'm an electrician or a plumber, I can easily find a job. If I have a BA in business studies, I'll probably be unemployed in the middle of Norsim Lam. So, sometimes, to be very cheeky and impertinent, I say that the Bhutanese education system is perfectly designed to produce unemployment. Now, it's a rather rude comment to make, so Ministry of Education, please forgive me, but there is an element of truth in it. And I believe the education system needs to give far more emphasis to creating the person and not the knowledge, gives far more emphasis to the person and not the certificates, gives far more emphasis to teaching people skills and knowledge which will enable them to find employment if they wish. Now, the person is important because I can train a superb electrician, but there's no point in doing that unless I've also made that person want to be an electrician, want to do the best possible job he can do as an electrician. And to see this in action, all you have to do is go to the Institute of Zorig Chusum, and you see young people there who may be just class 10 passed, it used to be class 8 passed, working on painting a beautiful tanka. Patience, care, skill, pride in what they're producing. You see them working on a clay statue. Beautiful, care, patience, concern, pride in what they're doing. And I would like to see society encourage people to have pride in what they're doing, no matter what their job. And you mentioned Japan. You go to Japan on the underground and you will see people sweeping the station, white gloves, smart uniform, long brush, long pan. They exude pride in their job. And I believe we should encourage young people here to have pride whatever they're doing, even to have pride if you're unemployed, because there are things you can do as a volunteer that can give you a great deal of pride. So, forget all these wretched qualifications. Let's have young people being educated to be helpful, useful, productive, and contented citizens.
And moving back to history, your views, how significant is 17th of December for Bhutanese and for Bhutan?
Highly. The 17th of December marked a turning point in Bhutan, because for 200 years before that, after the death of the Shabdrung became known, Bhutan was a constant chaos of internal warfare. And everybody who reads their Bhutan history will know that it's which Penlop had a battle with which Penlop and which, etc. Total internal chaos. The life of people was horrible, and sometimes I say, if I'm talking to tourists who are falling asleep, I say, knock on the door, 6 o'clock in the evening, messenger from the Dzongda, battle against Wangdi Phodrang, 8 o'clock in the morning, report at the Chang Limitang. Life was terrible. the monarchy brought internal peace and security and stability. So December the 17th was an absolute watershed between 200 years of chaos and 100 years of peace, stability, and ever improving way of life. One cannot underestimate the importance of that date.
You have served in Bhutan during the 4th Drugenpo and 3rd as well.
Yes.
So how do you personally depict or describe their leadership?
All teachers remember many of their students. I have enormous admiration for the 4th Drugenpo. He ascended the throne at a very young age. He ascended the throne as virtually an absolute ruler. He was responsible himself for Bhutan. That is quite a burden to put on the shoulders of a 17-and-a-half-year-old. He educated himself. He was, as you know, an avid reader, not of novels and romance stories, but of books on economics, on statecraft, on politics, on international relations. He was an avid reader. He is a man who has educated himself. And it's said, you know, that somebody assumes high office and they grow into the office. I cannot think of any better example of somebody who has grown into the office. I believe one of the great attributes of His Majesty the Fourth King is to be able to look ahead into the future. I mentioned, and I don't know whether it will appear in this talk, but I mentioned the idea of planning for tomorrow today. His Majesty the Fourth King planned for tomorrow 10 years ahead. And if we look at all his moves towards democracy, over a period of 15 years or 20 years, he introduced all sorts of small changes, setting up Geogyagi Shokchungs and all this sort of thing, the vote for every person over the age of 80, gradually moving towards the concept of full democracy. It wasn't a sudden decision like that. It was a long time, and he planned it over a long time. So, of all the people I know in Bhutan, I think His Majesty the Fourth King was somebody who plans for tomorrow today rather than the average, which is planning for today tomorrow. I think also His Majesty has an immensely warm human side. Now, not necessarily everybody will see that because, you know, the king doesn't go around hugging people all the time. But from personal experience, I have been acutely aware of how human, kind, thoughtful, sensitive, sympathetic His Majesty the Fourth King is. And I have been privileged in many ways, on many occasions, to benefit from that kindness. So I believe he has a very, very, very wonderful human heart, as well as a crown on the head. He is somebody who so clearly has been dedicated to the nation and the people, and not, as some rulers of countries are, interested in making his own personal fortune. He has, as all the kings of Bhutan have done actually, this is one of the attributes of the monarchy of Bhutan, he has kept very, very close to the people. And, you know, His Majesty was not the first person to get a great big giant Land Cruiser. As you will know, until very recently he travelled around in a rather old model of a dark blue Land Cruiser, which was beginning to get a wee bit shabby. He is not one for material demonstration of his power. And I think he did, and continues to do, I think, as an example. He has done marvels for the country. If you think of all the challenges he's had to face, as Bhutan has emerged into the outside world. And it's not just Bhutan going into the outside world, it's also the outside world coming into Bhutan. And he has had to deal with all those challenges. And it's not easy. Bhutan may be a small country, but running a whole country and a nation, whether it's big or small, the challenges are often the same. So don't say, well, you would say that, wouldn't you? Because what I've just said is an absolutely genuine comment. And I think Bhutan is very, very lucky in its monarchs. And that will continue in the future, I feel sure.
And as the senior citizen of Bhutan, what would be your advice for our viewers?
Right. Well, I've already said one or two things. Put emphasis on harmony. Put emphasis on educating young people to take a value in who they are, what they are, rather than what job they have. Yes, for the future. First of all, I would like to say that I believe the future of Bhutan is going to be very positive. The young people of Bhutan, I believe, are marvellous. So many qualities. One or two non-qualities, ego I've already mentioned, a little bit of growing materialism, but I believe the young people of Bhutan have enormous potential, and it's up to the older generation, the people in charge today, to make sure that that potential is encouraged and developed and not discouraged or put down. Sometimes in any society it can happen that a bright young person joins an organisation and the boss, ooh dear, a little bit jealous, this bright young person, let's hold them down. Well, I think Bhutan needs to bring people up rather than keep people down. There are so many new ideas. You've only got to talk to a random selection of 20 young Bhutanese and you're impressed by how many ideas there are. So I believe encourage young people to be innovative, inventive, thoughtful, original, active, enthusiastic. I don't use the word entrepreneurship. I just mean in their general character and nature. Encourage them. Secondly, as I've said, I think bureaucracy needs to understand it's there to encourage people and to help people and not stop people. And that's quite difficult for a bureaucracy to take on board. Thirdly, I've said this already, Bhutan should have the confidence to develop its own models for doing things and not slavishly take on board the way things are done in other countries. If I can give you an example, you go to Paro Airport. It's quite the most delightful airport in the world. In the middle of the baggage circle, where in other countries you have signs saying, do not let your children stand on this, do not sit on the board, etc. Here, what do we have? We have beautiful models of the zongs. There's no other country in the world that has had the imagination to make the luggage carousel into a lovely thing. So don't slavishly adopt the models of other countries. Look at them, learn from them, and then turn them into a Bhutanese model. I do believe that to create and encourage a harmonious society is so important. And part of that involves narrowing the gap. Part of that involves encouraging each person to feel that they are contributing, that they are worthwhile, that they have a value in life. One of the really bad things about Bhutan is this youth suicide. Now, I think that is a terrible condemnation. And young people with so much of life ahead, if they feel they're so worthless that they're going to kill themselves, that is a very, very bad thing. We need to show that every person, whether you're a sweeper, whether you're a dasho, whether you're a very rich business person, whether you're a young student, that you have a value and to help people develop this sense of value, doing things, volunteer to do things. I mean, for example, I have somebody who helps me with the Royal Tutorial Project who runs all sorts of voluntary activities. I mean, he's created his own something called a youth initiative or something, where he gets lots of young people volunteering for things. Now, they get self-worth from that. He, I hope, gets self-worth from having organised it. No pay. You don't judge yourself by how much money you earn. You judge yourself by what you do for yourself, what you do for your family, and what you do for society, and what you do for the nation. Not by how many nultrums you earn a month or how big your motor car is. And it is true to say one of the bad things about Bhutan, people set too much store by the outward sign. So if I turn up at a police check in a great big top-of-the-range Land Cruiser, they will treat me differently from if I turn up in a little old Maruti Alto. I remember a very well-known retired Dasho who was very important. I remember him when he got his first means of transport. He was so proud of it. And he used to go up and down. The dual carriageway didn't exist. It was no little road here by the swimming pool. He used to go up and down on this very proud, with his red scarf folded over the back. And it was a little scooter. By the time he retired, he'd had a great big top-of-the-range Land Cruiser. So don't set your self-worth by what you have, by what you earn, by whether you've got a red scarf, a green scarf, a blue scarf, a white scarf, a pink scarf, a purple scarf, or in your case, a red scarf. Set your own self-worth by what you do. And you can do all sorts of things. Even if you don't have a job, you can do an enormous amount. So I suppose if I wanted to see Bhutan succeed, I would say two things. First of all, be proud of being Bhutanese. And I don't mean proud in an egotistic way. And I suppose, this sounds a really old-fashioned thing to say, preserve your culture. Modernize the culture, but preserve it in a modern way. Because I do agree that one of the most true things His Majesty the Fourth King ever said, if you remember, he said, we're a very small country, we don't have a big army, with two enormous neighbours. We need to protect ourselves. What is the one way we have to protect ourselves? And that is our culture. Now, we need to find a new word, because culture, you know, culture. So we need to find a new word. But I would call it pride in being Bhutanese and not anything else. That is Bhutan's greatest defense against all future threats.
Thank you very much for your time
My
and sharing
pleasure.
your insight with us.
Very nice to talk.
Anything you want to add?
Well, not really, except I'm an old man, very privileged to be able to live in such a wonderful country. And all I have to do is travel outside, and it makes me glad to get back.
Thank you.